It'll hurt, but Star Trek fans need to know Sulu's reaction to Captain Kirk's death. When James T. Kirk died in Star Trek Generations 1994, it was a gut punch for millions of fans. The fearless captain of the USS Enterprise, explorer, risk-taker, womanizer, and stubborn idealist, met an end that felt, at best, bittersweet. He died not on the bridge of his ship, not in a blaze of glory with his crew at his side, but in a collapsed scaffolding on a forgotten planet while helping Captain Picard save the galaxy. His famous last words, "Oh my," were left hauntingly unfinished. But in all the debates over whether Kirk's death was worthy, one perspective often gets overlooked. How did Hikaru Sulu, his longtime helmsman protege and eventual captain of the USS Excelsior, react to the loss of the man who had defined so much of his career? It's a question that stings because while the film didn't show us Sulu's grief, fans can piece together the emotional truth from decades of canon character history and the deep bond between the two men. The answer isn't easy. It'll hurt. But Sulu's reaction to Kirk's death is one of the most poignant what-ifs in Star Trek history, and it reveals just how profound the ripple effects of Kirk's sacrifice would have been. Brothers in command, before we talk about grief, we need to remember what Kirk and Sulu meant to each other. From the very first episodes of Star Trek, the original series, Sulu embodied Kirk's ideal of a Starfleet officer capable, brave, and unshakably loyal. While Spock was the voice of logic and McCoy the voice of humanity, Sulu was one of Kirk's anchors in the trenches of command. Whether piloting the Enterprise through impossible maneuvers or leading away missions with sword in hand, Sulu was one of Kirk's most trusted officers. In the episode The Corbomite Maneuver, Kirk relies on Sulu to maintain the ship's course under unthinkable pressure. In The Naked Time, Kirk urges Sulu to fight through his delirium because he knows his helmsman spirit is unbreakable. Even in the lighthearted chaos of Mirror, Mirror, Kirk trusts Sulu to play his part in restoring order even when the helmsman is his ruthless doppelganger. Most importantly, Kirk modeled the path of command that Sulu would one day follow. By the time of Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, Sulu had his own command, the USS Excelsior. His quiet, confident leadership bore the unmistakable imprint of Kirk's influence. Sulu didn't copy Kirk's swagger or risk-taking style. Instead, he took Kirk's lessons and molded them into his own philosophy of responsibility and steadiness. In many ways, Sulu was the son Kirk never had. That's why Kirk's death would have devastated him on multiple levels, as a crewmate, as a friend, and as the very model of the leader he had become. A death without witnesses. The tragedy of Kirk's end is compounded by the fact that none of his old crew were there to see it. Picard watched him die, but for Sulu, Uhura, Chekhov, Scotty, and Spock, the news would have come later, delivered through official Starfleet channels or whispered across the grapevine of officers who still spoke of the legendary Enterprise captain with awe. Imagine Sulu in his ready room aboard the Excelsior, receiving the communiqué. He would have stood at attention as the message played, listening with grim composure as Starfleet command explained the circumstances. He might not have flinched outwardly. Sulu was, by then, a seasoned captain with decades of experience in loss. But inwardly, the weight would have been crushing. For Sulu, Kirk was more than just a commanding officer. He was the one who had taken him into the unknown and taught him how to be fearless. To hear that Kirk had died in obscurity, on a world few would remember, must have felt like a cruel betrayal of all the glory and courage the man represented. Sulu's private grief. Canon doesn't give us Sulu's reaction, but George Takei, who played him, once said in interviews that he always imagined Sulu processing Kirk's influence as the bedrock of his Starfleet identity. If that's true, then Sulu's grief wouldn't have been loud or dramatic. It would have been measured, dignified, and deeply private. Picture him alone in his quarters after hearing the news. Perhaps he poured a glass of sake, staring silently at the stars outside his window. Perhaps he replayed, in his mind, the countless times Kirk had pushed the Enterprise past its limits, or the way his captain would flash that half-smile when the odds seemed hopeless. He would have felt anger, too. Anger that Kirk's death was so ordinary. No mighty starship destroyed in battle, no poetic blaze of glory, no farewell surrounded by his crew. Sulu would have wrestled with that frustration, questioning whether the universe had been unfair to the man who gave it everything. And yet, beneath it all, Sulu would have found pride. Pride that Kirk had gone out exactly as he lived, putting himself in harm's way to save billions of lives. Pride that his captain had stayed true to his final words in Star Trek II. I've always known. I'll die alone. How it shaped Sulu as a captain. Kirk's death wasn't just a personal tragedy for Sulu, it would have changed how he led the Excelsior. Sulu was already a captain who valued patience and diplomacy, but Kirk's sacrifice might have pushed him further toward cherishing the lives of his crew above all else. Where Kirk leaned into risk, Sulu might have doubled down on caution, determined not to let anyone under his command meet the same lonely end. At the same time, Kirk's courage would have remained Sulu's guiding star. In moments of crisis, he might have heard Kirk's voice urging him to trust his instincts, to take the leap, to risk it all because that's what we do out here. It's easy to imagine an officer under Sulu's command asking him, during some tense standoff, whether he really believed the odds were in their favor. Sulu might have smiled faintly, almost in homage, and said, "If you knew Captain Kirk, you'd know the odds never mattered." The funeral that never was. One of the most painful omissions of Generations is that we never got to see a proper farewell for Kirk. For Spock, for Scotty, for McCoy, each of them had their chance at a final bow across Star Trek's films. But Kirk's funeral was never filmed, never shown, never even discussed in canon. For Sulu, this absence must have been infuriating. He would have advocated for Starfleet to honor Kirk with the grandeur he deserved, a service attended by dignitaries from across the Federation, his name inscribed alongside the greatest heroes of the fleet. And though Kirk would have scoffed at pomp and circumstance, Sulu would have insisted on it, not for Kirk's ego, but for history itself. In fan imagination, Sulu may have even delivered a eulogy. It's easy to picture him standing before a vast assembly of officers, his voice steady but heavy with emotion, saying something like, "Greater than Captain James T. Kirk showed us all that space is not our enemy, but our destiny. He taught us that the unknown is not to be feared, but embraced. And though he is gone, the course he set for us will never change. Warp Factor 1, Captain. We'll follow you still." Why fans need to face it. So why does it hurt to imagine Sulu's reaction? Because it reminds us that Kirk's death was not just the end of a story, it was a wound carried by those who loved him, both on screen and off. For decades, Star Trek fans have debated whether Kirk deserved better. And while the question is fair, perhaps the more profound truth lies in acknowledging how much his absence shaped the lives of those he left behind. Sulu's grief, though never shown, would have been immense, and yet, like all great Starfleet captains, he would have turned that grief into resolve. Kirk's final gift to Sulu wasn't his command style or his daring, it was the reminder that no matter